week. Our key topic will be everything you need to know when it comes to AFL Strength and Power programming. I'm going to lean towards more the coach's perspective. So if you're a strength and conditioning coach, high performance coach, make sure to send in your questions if you're tuning in live on YouTube, TikTok, or if you have any questions, you can hit me up if you're listening to the podcast on our social media. But we've got three key areas: general athleticism, injury mitigation, and periodization. So I'm going to break it down into those key segments. I'm also going to announce the upcoming live interviews we have on the Prepare Like a Pro podcast, a free workout. So hang around, specifically the athletes or those prescribing off-feet conditioning sessions. I've got a workout to give a crack at, and then this weekly poll, the findings on LinkedIn and Twitter. So we'll get straight into it. First key area from an AFL Strength and Power point of view is developing general athleticism. So as we know, in the gym, it's not going to specifically transfer onto the field, i.e. to get better at football, you need to be playing football and training the traits of football from a tactical, technical point of view. So what we are doing is improving the general athleticism, i.e. how high you can jump, your acceleration, your strength, your critical mass, so your body mass, specifically increasing muscle mass. So we're improving that general mobility, coordination, so general athleticism. And if you do a good enough job, one, it's going to make football easier, the better athlete you are, but also hopefully allow you to perform at a high level within your team and play your best football. So in terms of general athleticism, we want to be focusing on three key areas from a mobility point of view, specifically the ankle. So we can really work on things like utilizing the most of your Achilles, so jumps, acceleration, by having greater range of motion through your ankle. That will really help with that. So if you want to improve your power and your jump height, ankle mobility can be one area that will help with that. You can improve your hip mobility to help with things like lateral change of direction, and spine mobility, which will help with everything to do with having more options on the field from a movement competency point of view. So things like picking up ground balls in awkward situations, being able to pivot and rotate. Perhaps, it might be in a forward handball chain, and you need your hips are facing forward, but your torso is looking behind you. So you'll have more options the more mobile your spine is. But think of it in those three key areas. So if you've got some time to work on mobility, for AFL footballers, we want to be spending majority of the time on specifically the ankle, hip, and spine, and you'll get a lot of return on investment from that point of view. So perhaps in warm-up for the gym, you might be spending a couple of drills there working on each of those three. Improving running mechanics, so just to wake the athletes up, or after a big field session, or just to get some extra athlete development in. The gym can be a great place because you've got smaller amount of athletes typically in an AFL setting in the gym than when we have them on the field. So it's a great time to break down coordinated, complex running mechanics to work on things like connection with the ground, so making sure we're not too toey, we're not too heel, but we're getting that good mid-foot strike. We're getting good extension through our knee and specifically, more importantly, our hip. Our ribs aren't flaring up everywhere. We're keeping the ribs down. You got good hip lock control. So working on these things, slowing down the running mechanic drills, and making sure the athletes are doing them at a really high level. So then when you're working them with them on the field in larger groups, they've got a good reference of what success feels like. And then from the strength and power point of view, we want to be working on max strength, so i.e. how heavy the athlete can lift. Typically for lower body lifts, we want athletes around 2 times body weight. So you weigh 100 kilos, you should be deadlifting and box squatting 200 kilos as your 1 rep max. Bench pressing 1.5. So if you're bench pressing 100, if you weigh 100 or 150 kilos, and their long-term aims, doesn't mean that the athlete has to get there, but just generally speaking for those that are listening that want to be an AFL athlete, that's some of the standards, elite standards that we want athletes working towards or maintaining. Then from a power point of view, so how explosive can you move moderate weight? So it might be some weighted jumps, it might be some Smith machine throws, some banded jammer presses. So typically moderate weight, moving really, really as fast as possible. That's where the tool GymAware can be really effective, because it gives us some feedback, and the athletes will get more competitive on how fast they're moving the object. So like the Smith machine bench throw, we attach the GymAware to it. They throw it as fast and as high as they can, and they'll get a reading, and that's fantastic for power training. Then we've got our speed strength work, so lighter weight again, so really light bands. It might be light med balls. So we want to basically move light objects as fast as possible. So that's a really, really important quality for being able to work on your explosive strength. And typically the fundamental movement patterns of those will be a squat or a deadlift, press like a bench press, and a pull like a bench pull, both in horizontal and also getting some accessory work in vertical as well to help with things like overhead stability. So that's where your overhead press, dumbbell press can come in, and chin-ups. And also hip hinging to work the posterior chain, and more specifically work the top end of the hamstrings, your proximal hamstrings, so things like an RDL. So they're your fundamentals. Then from a reactive strength point of view, we make sure that we're getting in both double leg and unilateral plyometrics to reduce the likelihood of things like ACL injuries. I did a recent post with Dean Benton. If you want more information on that, search for Dean Benton, Prepare Like a Pro, and that blog post will pop up. But also not just from an injury mitigation point of view, but also from a performance point of view. So making sure the athletes are stiff to be able to handle activities that they need to be able to do on the field, like agility and sprinting. So building stiff, strong athletes is really, really important, and you can't go wrong with programming in plyometrics. So things like single leg forward hops over hurdles, coming off a box, repeat broad jumps, drop jumps coming off a box and landing onto, and depth jumps landing onto another box. So anything where we want to be spending around 2.5 milliseconds for contact time, so really short. We can use force plates to measure that. So short contact times. Favorite cue for that is telling the athlete it's hot coals. We don't want to burn your feet, so don't spend lots of time on the ground. It's a short amount of time, but we also want to make sure their intent is to jump as far as possible. So whether it be horizontally for things like broad jumps, or vertically towards the sky, the ceiling. So it's not just short contact and not going anywhere. We want to make sure we're really going as far as we can. So that's general athleticism. I think if you prioritize that in your programming, strength and power program, you're doing a lot right for an AFL athlete. That's probably 80% of our focus. Then from an injury mitigation point of view, developing resilient, robust athletes, we're making sure we're getting some hamstring, eccentric hamstring work in there. So some single leg slide outs, some Nordics, some weighted Nordics, glute, single leg back extensions. So anything where we're trying to work on developing the strength through our hammies. We want to have good exercises challenging our lumbopelvic control. So that's where the unilateral work can come in, making sure we've got good understanding of our hip lock and also our rib cage. So being in that hip hike position, and also being able to keep our ribs down and not flaring out the back. So things like a single leg squat, we can work on standing on a plate and doing a hip lock with a press overhead to challenge the rib connection control. So that's where the lumbopelvic control can be some slower stability-based work at the end of training. And if you're adding some in as well as part of your running mechanics by bringing a stick overhead, weight plates out in front, aqua bags, things to challenge that trunk and hip control. And then also from injury, as we know with football, it's not sagittal plane. We want to make sure we're moving through the frontal plane. So that's where your Copenhagen's, your cable abductions, cable adductions, some lateral lunges with the slide outs. So making sure we're working through the frontal plane. Also, even just for shoulder health as well. So dumbbell lateral raises, really important. And not everything's just sort of front and back. So make sure you're working through the frontal plane is also a key area to focus on when programming. Last part, periodization, simply our planning. Typically, if we're in season mode, which we are with this recording, We want to be quite agile in the gym, making sure we're keeping our finger on the pulse on how the athletes are feeling and really finding that sweet spot between maximizing the stimulus to ensure that we're building robust athletes and we're maintaining consistency and consistent load, and intensity would be the priority. But also we want to make sure we're giving them a chop out when they are showing signs of potentially being off for that day. So whether it be they had a huge field session, their joints are sore, maybe they're an older athlete or they're a younger athlete. So taking in some individual details into account, and you might not be changing the exercise, but you might just be talking about the importance of slowing them down that day and focusing on really quality movement. And naturally, you might be stripping a bit of weight off, or you might just be reducing the range of motion for them, so a higher box that they're box squatting, or adding a plate under their deadlift, so you're reducing the range of motion so you can maximize intensity, actually go heavier, but reduce the range, so there's not going to be as much build up of fatigue. And hopefully you get a good neural response. They're feeling better for it at the end of that session, and you get them out of that hole. So that's where the coach comes into it with the periodization. We want to, like I said, listen to the athletes, especially the older ones and the younger ones, and adjust it. The middle ones is where we probably just want to stick with our routine and consistency and not change too much. Take into account what happened on the field session. So you'd have your plan set out, but if the field session was a lot more demanding than originally laid out, then that's when you might adjust things and take a set off here and there with some exercises. And we want to also take into account from a mental point of view, particularly early in the week, the first session in season will be a lot of meetings. So that's where you might simplify the movements and plan ahead to make sure that the movements we're doing on those days, they're not as neurally demanding. So they're not your explosive movements. They're not really complex coordinated movements. They're movements the athletes are familiar with. They can double down with the intensity by lifting heavy, and they're simple. So the athletes can get a good stimulus, strength stimulus typically, maintain some good muscle mass, and then later in the week when they're recovered from the game, there's less meetings on that main train days where we might increase the complexity of movements, add some variety to the program every couple of weeks with some different variations, and also go for that more power development, focus, and speed strength. So hopefully that helped. General athleticism, injury mitigation, periodization. I think if you get those three big rocks right, you've done a great job. No matter what level you're working with, you can apply those three things. So if you're a football strength and conditioning coach and you listen to that, I'd love to hear your thoughts or anything that I missed. Email me at jack@preparelikeapro.com that you'd like me to discuss further on, or perhaps you just have some pointers as well. It'd be great to have a discussion. So either on LinkedIn, Instagram, find me there and let's have a chat. This week for the podcast, Ryman Timmins episode will be published on Wednesday. A fantastic episode around hamstring and the most latest research on applied hamstring mitigation exercises. Also talked about the AFL specifically and changes that have happened in history over the last 10 years. Have we had more hamstring injuries? What's the severity of the injuries? So fascinating chat. Make sure to listen to that on Wednesday. 2 live interviews. First with David Boyle at 3 p.m. Australian Standard Time. Second one, we've got 2 guests on for the one show, both working with the Dolphins. Jeremy Hickman's the high performance coach, and Blake Duncan, the head strength and power. They'll be at 4:30 p.m. And then Friday, our bite-sized episode for the week will be with Sarah Perkins, AFLW legend. So if you enjoy that 10-minute episode, make sure to search for Sarah Perkins on your favourite podcast app to listen to the whole episode. The poll findings from this week was around best way to monitor athletes, specifically team field-based athletes' progress. Is it strength and power, speed, agility, aerobic capacity, or movement competency? Some interesting findings. There's still 3 more days left on this poll, so find me on LinkedIn and Twitter to contribute to this poll. But on LinkedIn, strength and power came out at 41%, which is the strongest finding. And on Twitter, it was the strongest, comfortably at 60%. Speed and agility, improving speed and agility, came at 14% on LinkedIn, 30% on Twitter. Aerobic capacity, very small on this poll, so 3% on LinkedIn and 10% on Twitter. And then movement competency was 41% on LinkedIn, so equal highest from a LinkedIn point of view, and only 0% currently on Twitter. This week's poll will be your favorite off-feet cross-training sessions. Do you prefer bike, boxing, swim, or circuits, whether you be an athlete? Or I'm also keen to hear strength and rehab coaches that prescribe off-feet conditioning sessions. Which one do you typically like to lean on? I know for me, My probably most important thing when it comes to off-field conditioning for AFL athletes is what do they get a kick out of, what do they enjoy the most, so they're going to work the hardest on those. Work rate's the key, getting that average heart rate up nice and high. As we know, there's not a lot of transference from these to running, so really I'll check in, find out what the athlete likes to do. If they love boxing, I'll tap into that. If they like following bike programs, I'll tap into that. If they like variety and circuits, I'll tap into that. So work on that, and then just make sure we're programming exercises that's not going to beat their body up, but also is going to maximize the aerobic conditioning work, and taking into account what they did from a field session point of view. So specifically if they're rehab and it was more aerobic running based session, then I'll program more anaerobic cross training. If it was an aerobic session, I'll program more aerobic capacity. Also take into account what the athlete needs as well. So if they typically need more exposures to aerobic work, I'll program more cross-training aerobic, where you fluctuate the work-to-rest ratio. Where if it's anaerobic stuff, I'll program more of high-intensity work and longer rest. Free workout for this week, talk about cross circuits. I love using some form of CrossFit competition modality workouts. Obviously, the exercises are chosen, so we're not doing Olympic lifts under fatigue, we're not doing plyometrics in this format, but just simple movements like a rower, an assault bike, and a ski erg for this workout. So any footballer should be able to do those at a good movement competency. They're low load on the joints. As long as they're rowing with good technique, they're not going to hurt their back. So those three exercises are pretty good. And the way the workout works is it's a descending ladder. So you set the clock's running, you do 33 cal row and then a 33 calorie on the assault bike. Then you move down 6 calories each time. So it's 27, 27, 21, 21, 15, 15, and then we're going down to 9 and 9. However, every 6 minutes on the clock, you've got to jump off those stations and complete a 300-meter ski sprint. So from 0 to 6, let's say you get yourself to the 21 cals, as soon as you're on 14 cals on the assault bike and then the 6 minute clicks up, you're off the bike. You jump in that 3 minute ski. It takes you a minute. Now you've got 5 minutes left to try and get through the rest of the workout before you have to jump on the ski again. So it's a nice carrot to maximize high intensity and really compete with yourself for athletes that are by themselves. When athletes are working together, I like to program partner workouts where you get that effect, where you might have one person doing 30 calories on the assault bike, the other person's got to hold an uncomfortable movement like kettlebell front rack, dead ball, hanging from the bar, anything like that, where the partner doing the bike, they're the timer, and they're working for their partner to make it the shortest amount of time possible. So it's a real win-win. Thank you for tuning in for this week's episode. Feel free to send in any questions for an upcoming topic. I'm going to change the way that we do things over from September onwards in terms of our weekly content is going to move to more monthly content for the free podcast. However, we're going to continue our weekly content for Academy members, so those on our online program and those on our membership, whether they're a footballer or a coach. You can join those memberships for as little as $20 a month, and you get access to a full database of exercises, drills, and presentations that I've done over the last few years, as well as we're bringing on guest experts to present on topics like nutrition, sports psychology, coaching, topics like periodization, strength and power program, conditioning. So if you're interested in joining, head over to academy.preparelikeapro.com.au. And of course, we've also got our online free program as well. So if you check out preparelikeapro.com, you can join our program valued at $99 a month for free for 14 days. So make sure to check that out. Thanks for tuning in.